Everyone, and welcome to Novata's first webinar of the year, Strengthening Business Resilience in 2025. I'm Meredith Binder, Chief Marketing Officer at Novata, and I am delighted to be joined today by Josh Green, Chief Operating Officer at Novata, Mona Sutphen, Partner and Head of Investment Strategies at the Vistria Group, and Allison Benz, Organizational Behavior and Sustainable Investing Expert. Thank you all for being here today with us. I have a few questions to kick us off, but we also want to use today's time to respond to our audience and answer what's top of mind for our users. So to those of you on the call today, thank you for joining us. If you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll do my very best to get to them. We do have a lot to talk about today, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on housekeeping. I want to dive right in, starting with a theme that has been talked about a lot here at Novata and along with our clients, which is resilience. And the word resilience keeps coming up as critical for businesses in 2025. So I want to begin today by asking each of you, what does it mean for a business to be resilient in today's context? And Mona, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's an interesting conversation per usual. So I'd say in the post-COVID world, for me, resilience is summed up in one word, which is nimble. Because whether it's tax policy, interest rates, supply chains, you name it, regulatory uncertainty, you just have to stay on your toes and you have to be ready for it coming at you, whatever that it is. And so you just need the processes and information and ability to really look over the horizon and see what's coming your way. Otherwise, you're stuck playing defense constantly, never on offense, and you're scrambling around and you're wasting time and valuable resources and potentially threatening the value of your enterprises.
Thanks. Josh, how about you?
I think Mona hit the nail on the head in terms of being nimble, because the amount of change that we're all coping with is enormous, and it feels like it's accelerating. And so you can look at just about any aspect of your business and think about how a dynamic environment might impact it. But if you boil it down, you want to make sure that you are resilient to changes on the supply side, and you want to make sure you're resilient to changes on the demand side. And if you've thought through it from those two angles, you're probably in a pretty good position to withstand the range of possibilities that are coming your way.
And Allison?
Next. I mean, I agree with everything that Mona and Josh just said. When I think about resilience, I think about sort of two things. You have the sort of financial model and business case for what you do, but there's also the sustainability factors, which are really focused in times of uncertainty around managing your stakeholder groups with as much transparency as possible, with open communication. People tend to take gaps in information and any kind of uncertainty and like rush to the worst case scenario. And so if you're not managing those communications, you're gonna, organizational trust will be eroded. I think this is also a time where organizational culture is really important. And having the trust that your leaders are trying to do the right thing, have your best interests in mind, right? Because people are facing a lot of challenges, financially, personal lives, other things, in addition to all of these business challenges, and feeling like everyone in your company is sort of rowing the boat in the same direction becomes really, really important when there's so much uncertainty in the market as far as regulations and business models and supply chains, et cetera.
Thank you. I think that aligns really similarly to what we've heard from clients, and definitely the uncertainty in the markets and the geopolitical environment and people's personal lives as well is, I think, really resonating with the term resilience, both in and out of an organization. Which aligns really nicely to a report that we released just yesterday that both Mona and Allison contributed to, thank you very much, called 9 Sustainability Trends for Private Markets to Watch in 2025. And if you're on the call and you haven't seen that yet, we're happy to share it after the webinar. And I want to ask Mona and Allison to dive more deeply into their comments on that report. But before I do that, I'd love to hear from the audience about what's top of mind for them this year. So can we open up a quick poll to get our audience feedback on trends that are top of mind for you in 2025? So if you're on the call, please let us know. Regulatory changes, geopolitical impact on sustainability, physical climate risks, AI, decarbonization. And if there's a trend on there that we haven't talked about or isn't listed, that's really critical to you, feel free to put that into the Q&A or the chat, and we will see if we can address that as part of our conversation today. So please fill this poll in, let us know what's top of mind, and if we can push the results, that would be terrific.
Notably, panelists are not allowed to vote, which is disappointing.
Can I vote? Yeah.
Well, you are welcome to share your vote in real time. But before I ask you to do that, it looks like there are some pretty strong feelings around geopolitical impact on sustainability and regulatory changes, which is definitely what I think we might expect from this audience. AI coming in third here, and then followed by the environment or environmental risks or thought processes as the next layer down. How does that resonate with you, Allison?
I mean, this makes sense. The regulatory changes, especially in the US context, given the Inflation Reduction Act, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around whether or not the tax credits are going to be a sort of going concern into the future. And when you're an investor, you want to make sure that there's some kind of policy certainty before you set up an investment strategy around government regulations, et cetera. So I think that that's really important. The geopolitical risk is also everywhere right now. It feels like there's little fires sort of all burning all over the world. And I think figuring out where those things go in the short term is important, but still sort of understanding that there are larger structural trends in sustainability globally that I think will continue. But curious to see what Mona's number one risk was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, it's not just the US, because we had 60 national elections last year globally, which is a lot. And we saw incumbents tossed pretty much everywhere. I think there's really only a couple of governments that managed to hold in place. And the range of the changes that are going to flow through as a result are pretty profound. So it's one thing for the pendulum to move. It's another thing for it to move 180 degrees or 160 degrees or whatever. And that's kind of where we are, and not just here, but everywhere. So it's kind of an unprecedented level of churn at the political level, that to the point that Allison just made about whether it's tax policy, IRA implementation, et cetera, is all the companies are going to have to adjust, investors are going to have to adjust. But I'd say you alluded to another point that I think people don't quite spend as much time thinking about, which is the fact that the foundation for how the economy interacts, our economy interacts with the rest of the world, is also changing, because we're moving to a place where national security is now defined as economic nationalism, which is a real departure from where we've been in the post-Cold World era. And so you see that in supply chains, you see that in anything sensitive technologies. We're probably in inning 4 on that, and it's not just us, it's everybody everywhere. And so for companies that are, and investors that are living at those intersection points, there's certainly a lot now suddenly embedded risk that was not there before, that you could not have anticipated when you made the investment. And so you're kind of stuck living in the world as it's unfolding. So I think people spend a lot of time thinking about the near term, what's going to happen this year, but this is a long-term trend that's underneath, that's rowing, giving it momentum, and I think that's going to continue. So,
Josh?
2 thoughts. One, I do think the supply chain uncertainty is particularly acute right now. I mean, seeing the news that Canada's drawn up its list of retaliatory tariffs, that's a harbinger of things to come. And having spent the last part of my career in supply chain, I feel for folks who have to face that kind of uncertainty. But look, I think there's an elephant in the room for people who are in the sustainability business, which is that sustainability itself is something that is a political football right now, and is facing winds blowing in opposing directions. Right, you have some geographies that at the federal level in the U.S. It feels like the winds are blowing against sustainability, but at the state level, they're at least in some cases, they're going to be blowing in the other direction. And so, I think sustainability folks have thought about how to harden their businesses for differing possibilities and change that's coming. But now sustainability professionals also have to think about how to harden their sustainability programs so that they're defensible no matter which way the winds are blowing in the years ahead.
But I think, Josh, I think this is an opportunity for those of us who really believe that sustainable investing and sustainability programs are accretive to either returns or accretive to corporate performance. This is the time to demonstrate it, because now you can't dress it up with all of the fun sustainability marketing. You just have to get the work done, right? And you have to prove the business case that we've been proving all along. And if companies are going to start backing off of actual sustainability programs, not just what they call them, but actual activities, then they probably weren't the right activities to begin with, because the sustainability activities should be aligned with corporate performance, should be aligned with expected returns in a meaningful and material way. So I think this could be the sort of proof of concept of we were sort of doing it better all along, and we have to be a little quieter about it now. We have to lead with numbers first. We have to not have as much flashy marketing, but we're still going to get the work done.
Just from the comments from the three of you, it sounds like a lot to balance for any team or organization to think about near-term and short-term, or near-term opportunities and long-term impacts, regional, local, state versus global versus macroeconomic. How should companies be thinking about these trends from those different perspectives? Mona, maybe you alluded to it in your answer of nimble as it relates to resilience, but how should companies be thinking about balancing all those different dynamics?
Yeah, I actually think to the point that Allison and Josh both made, I mean, we're really in I think a period where, at least certainly in the US, where there's a perception right now that somehow, for example, the regulatory landscape is going to be a little bit more muted. And I actually think that's a foundationally wrong conclusion, in part because of the two Supreme Court decisions, Loper Bright and Corner Post. And it's going to weigh as a tax on any kind of enterprise. Corner Post in particular, because it allows you to roll but look back to multiple decades in the past and potentially change the regulatory environment and have that spill forward into the future. It's a novel way to deal with that kind
Mona,
of risk.
can you unpack those Supreme Court decisions for people who might not know?
So yeah, so Loper Bright was a Supreme Court. They both came out in the last cycle. Loper Bright essentially gave federal regulators a narrower band of the where and how they can regulate, really based on the original statutory language. And when you think about what the federal regulatory posture has been doing in various places, a lot in the energy space, for example, a lot in healthcare, heavily regulated industries, the feds changed their interpretations about what's material along the way based on how industries are evolving. And basically the Loper decision said, you can't do that anymore. It has to be within the boundaries of what Congress passed in terms of the law. So it opens up, you see tons of litigation already to challenge more recent regulatory decisions. Actually, Corner Post is actually, in a way, even more problematic because it allows you to go back in time. So past regulations, but current harmed enterprises can then sue on the basis of being harmed by past regulation. So you're cracking open kind of the past. You also see a ton of very consequential litigation. So for example, in healthcare, reimbursement rates under Medicare Advantage are in a lawsuit right now. So health insurers are paid based on those formulas. If those are wrong, then guess what? Like your entire P&L is just unclear. So, and the problem you have is every decision then has to make its way through your district courts and back up to the Supreme Court. So there's just a tax, a fundamental uncertainty that's been embedded now in the system that really nobody can get their arms around other than looking for spaces where there's lots of consensus. But of course, we're investors, so you don't make a lot of money when you're investing in consensus. You make money when you're growing businesses and evolving, right, as the economy evolves. So it's a really challenging environment. I would say the way we've been approaching, and I think this is super essential, is the scenario planning that you did when you're investing. You have to do that all the time.
Yeah.
And I've seen portfolio companies, you have to give them the resources to see this panoply evolving. And particularly now that states are much more heavily involved, it's not a natural muscle memory for a lot of companies to be dealing at the state and local level in an integrated way. And then you have to really, I mean, this is the thing, you have to create multiple investment pathways to value creation. Everybody wants that, right? But now you really, really, really need that because you just don't know whether what you thought you were going to be able to execute is just going to get head off at the pass. And so I just think it's a very challenging environment, certainly for GPs to get a handle on where they want to deploy their capital and to think much more long-term about not just what's going to happen in the year or two, but what's going to happen for the next buyer and how the landscape might evolve fundamentally. So it's a new skill set. You need tons of you have to be data-driven at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely need good lawyers. I think Mona just made the case for that. Always. My first team member at Angela Gordon was a lawyer on purpose. But it is, yeah, it's an increasingly complex landscape. But I think the scenario planning aspect of it is real. I feel like a lot of companies do scenario planning because they feel like they have to, but like really being rigorous about the scenarios and making sure that you're cutting the scenarios the right way. I was talking to a European civil servant who was sort of figuring out the approach. He was in the Ministry of the Economy of this country, figuring out the diplomatic approach to a new presidential administration. And they said, like, typically they have like a holistic approach to a new administration. It's Republican coming in, here's the playbook. And they're like, we just have to throw that out the window. They are breaking down the policy approach by very specific, narrow policy areas because they don't think it's going to be a sort of comprehensive, it's going to be sort of more narrowly focused. And so, but for a country to sort of change fundamentally how they approach like a new administration, I think is really important. But I think for companies, it should be the same way. It's not going to be necessarily like a holistic and comprehensive approach. It could be whether it's the AI regulation that toggles on or off, or just figuring out what these sort of different layers of uncertainty are that are material to your business, and then being rigorous about what the scenarios are among each of them and how they fit together.
Yeah,
But it's basically four-dimensional chess at this point.
Yeah,
so.
It really is whack-a-mole. And then you have the state level, at least in the US, so it makes it even more complex. But I would say what you see people having to do is challenge your fundamental assumptions, right? So whatever, Medicare Advantage is a program that does X. Well, maybe what if it isn't? What if it does? It's not that. So like we have a tendency to take for granted and talk about the business as it is today without really, the competitive landscape.
Yeah.
Well, those competitors, but could it change fundamentally? Like what would that look like? So I just think there's going to be more embedded tax in the system, I think, just to understand the risk, manage it properly. You have to be rigorous, data-driven, and disciplined to really pay attention to what actually drives value and risk, because there's a ton of stuff that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, it's like, what would be a red line? What would make this company with its services not be able to deliver services anymore? That's the question, right? The rest of it you can manage, right? So I think it's getting back to basics, but cutting through all the noise and getting to the things that really matter the most.
Which is one, very hard to do, Mona, as you know, but two, like the lack of imagination in how scenario planning is typically done, right? Because you can't help but think that, the world is going to sort of incrementally change. And then when there is you have these big existential questions, it's much harder to do. But you basically made the business case for diversity because you want as many different sort of mindsets on the problem as possible so that you can see around corners you might not otherwise see. So I'm just going to go back to the argument for organizational culture as a significant driver of decision quality and optionality in a period where resilience is really important.
And I'd underline that point, Allison. I think we are returning to muscles that organizations need to build, right? And so in the context of all the change that we're seeing, all the crosswinds that we're experiencing, I think things like scenario planning, things like data collection, data management, things like, you know, collaborating across value chains, right? These are muscles that I think our organizations need to be investing in order to cope with all the change that's coming at them. So I do think there's the frame of, okay, what are all the things that could change? But I think there's also the framing of, okay, but what are the things that we can really bet on? And one of the things that we can bet on is that, you know, these taxes, Mona, as you described them, are going to have to be paid in the form of organizations investing in these areas.
Yeah. I also feel like a lot of organizations, you know, you'll have a leg up if you do this work, because what you see is a lot of people in the face of change, overwhelmed, playing whack-a-mole, feeling on the defensive always. But when you step back, what you really want is like, okay, that's noise. I don't have to worry about this drama over here. Here's the one or two places that I really have to spend some time and attention. You can't get to that analysis unless you're very disciplined and you understand what's going on in your business and what really those gating issues are. So I couldn't agree more that like that muscle is something. Some businesses do it really well, but the ones that do are going to be better off. They're just going to be better off because they're not going to get flat-footed. They're going to be resilient.
Exactly. I think this is also a good opportunity to like train the robot army of Chat GPT and AI to help you see around corners. And I don't, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but Chat GPT is like I don't know, it's like a constant companion. Because there are some times when I'm looking at data and I want to, and I'll ask it like, what am I missing here? Like, here are the things that I see as problems. Like, what do you see? I just to see what the robots are up to, right? Sometimes the robots are not very accurate. Sometimes they misunderstand the problem, but occasionally something pops out where you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Like, I mean, I uploaded like a pitch deck and was like, what questions would you ask based on this? And it was a completely different problem set than what I was asking, right? So I think wielding AI for good, not to cheat, not to just do your job, but really to help you see around corners and see things that the machine learning model can see that you with your embedded biases aren't necessarily going to see.
This has provided some really interesting actions, I think, for our audience, which I just want to quickly summarize, as well as ask our audience, please put into the Q&A any additional questions or conversations you'd like to have Mona, Allison, and Josh cover over this call. But I think looking around the corners, being agile, scenario planning, Mona, I really liked also the point about multiple investment pathways to value creation. I think that's really broad thinking and really interesting. And then Allison, going back to your conversation on organizations, you've spoken a lot about the transition economy, which is a term that I think we're hearing more and more about in the media. And I'd love to hear how you define that and how you might be thinking about the economy in the way that helps businesses continue to prepare to navigate these uncertainties.
Yeah, I think so. The transition economy, and I'm just going to make a shameless plug for there's a BCG white paper out on the transition economy that I think everyone should read because it's a very global sort of macro view on how the global economy is undergoing an industrial transformation that is sort of multi-generational in its uniqueness, which is, you know, these structural secular trends across Europe, across China, across other parts of Asia to decarbonize industrial systems, electrify transport, industry, create sustainable and resilient food systems for food security, and to build resilient infrastructure, especially in the face of sort of increasing natural disasters. But as these economies, put their energy into those things, that's not really where the US has been focused, right? But that's where the global opportunities are going to be, right? So the materials that are required to sort of do this decarbonization, do the electrification, do the construction of dams, bridges, this kind of thing that are resilient to natural disasters. I think companies need to think about where they're going to fit into that global opportunity. And so even as, as Mona pointed out, we're sort of becoming increasingly isolated for sort of economic security reasons. Our businesses still need to be able to respond to these sort of global trends that are not necessarily hydrocarbon focused, right? So the top 5 export categories for the US are hydrocarbon related, right? But the rest of the world has sort of moved on from this and is involved in a completely different sort of structural trend. I think China specifically, and I know Mona has thoughts on this, but China specifically has undergone a multi-decade campaign to invest in sort of infrastructure globally, but also to invest in these areas like battery storage, solar, wind energy, and they can do it in a very careful and incremental way because there is policy consistency over time. There's a 5-year plan, it's a rolling 5-year plan. What goes into the 5-year plan gets done. Where in the US, we have more of a pendulum process going on. But I think because we focus a lot on the deregulation and re-regulation that goes on in the US, we sometimes forget that the global system is moving in a different direction. And to the extent that we are going to continue to have a globalized economy, we need to respond to these bigger trends that are outside of the US as well.
I mean, one thing I'll just add about I have a little bit of a silver lining of this moment, which I know for sustainability experts feels like maybe not the best moment, which is that the politics and what's going on commercially and what's going on in policy, I think we're always very misaligned. And that's not just among Republicans or Democrats, just misaligned generally, meaning who benefits, who wins, where's the money going, et cetera, which is kind of all uneven. I do think that there is, you already see this happening with IRA, where you have lots of people saying, oh, no, we still want to have wind production credit. We still, oh, no, we still want these things, right? So I feel like this might be the turning point where there's a little bit more of a durable consensus in the United States about, what does that transition look like? So I always say it's a little bit like the ACA. IRA is really complicated. Same with the Affordable Care Act. It takes 10 years for a big complicated law like that to settle out politically, all the stakeholders, all the commercial, all the capital flowing. It takes a long time for all that to get to the point where it feels solid. And then, of course, you're still fighting on the margins about lots of things, but nobody's trying to get rid of the ACA anymore, right? So the people tried that didn't work, and then you go on to the next thing. So I feel like we're kind of at that point on the transition economy as well, with a large swath of the economy saying we just need to move on, and everybody else needs to catch up. Essentially, politics need to catch up, and the regulation needs to catch up. So I'm feeling, I wouldn't say hopeful, but more optimistic about that in the longer run, because it has to happen. So it will happen. How long?
From IRA, it's all of the red states, right? So it's not going to be as easy to just sort of claw back these tax credits on a rolling 4-year basis. I think there is.
Yeah, I mean, the most
there's stickiness.
Exactly. You have 20 House members who are like, no, we want to keep these tax credits. But interestingly, it's not just that they want it, because it's obviously wherever they are, they have interests, jobs and associated with it. It's the reaction of everybody else in the Republican caucus saying, oh, I think they're right about this. That's like a profound statement, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about the IRA, it's a very rich, very lucrative, it's got a lot of very, very costly tax credits in it. So I always say that it would have been on the chopping block in a Democratic administration as well. It's too expensive of a bill. That's just the reality of it. So So in a way, like, I think this is a little bit of a potential silver lining moment if we can move on from here. And to your point, Allison, get engaged in where the rest of the economies of the world are running.
I mean, I think it's very much a matter of what the IRA did was give people a runway to like either make these things stick and prove the business case, or they're going to go away. And I feel like everybody knew, right? And ironically, they were going, I mean, the money is going to states that you wouldn't have thought would have been taken advantage of the opportunity. But girl, we love a tax credit. I mean,
Everybody loves a tax
it is
credit.
like, it's so easy. You just need, you know, and it's the public-private partnerships we've seen be like are very difficult to take advantage of. But like you as a portfolio manager and a tax guy, like you can figure out the IRA tax credits pretty quickly. I mean, I think it took about like 3 months before I saw cash flow from a tax credit show up in a CLO after after the IRA was passed. I was like,
Yeah.
that was fast, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't think that most of those are going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the rest of it, we'll see, because it was an expensive bill. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll take a silver lining. Let's take one. And I'm gonna bounce back and forth between some additional questions on trends and the audience questions. And we do have one from Jim in our audience. With so many unknowns, it seems materiality is critical. Should collaborations within sectors be critical to assess what is material and what is not? Allison, you want to kick that off?
Yes, that is very helpful. That would be very helpful. And I do think that not to keep harping on AI, but this is a moment for AI to be helpful on the materiality front. When you think about like the economic system, sectors rely on each other across their value chains, right? They're all interconnected, but the assumptions that certain companies in certain sectors will make about how technology develops or how other business models develop for other industries in their value chain is very different. There's a lot of disconnect there. I would love to see, and especially with like the scenario planning that sometimes gets published in either sustainability reports or financial filings, there's somebody somewhere with a large language model needs to take this information across the economy and build it up and see where the gaps are and see where the material risks are at an economic level. Because I think there are a lot of assumptions that are not being challenged on a cross-sector basis when you look at the whole value chain for autos or you look at the whole value chain for financials. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. Jim, I'm not actually sure I answered your question specifically about sector integration, but I think more work needs to be done. And it goes to Mona's point about being able to look around the corner for these kinds of scenarios that might not be apparent.
But I do think generally it's better if the industry comes up with what they think is material as a general matter. We have a tendency, I mean, regulators do it. And as anybody who's dealt with regulators, 9 times out of 10, it's just wrong. Why? Because they're not in the sector. They don't understand how the business works. But as we know, our economy is very, very, very complex. And so to Allison's point, people know the piece that they're in, but the length of that chain of integration, of connection, people are blind spots, right? But it's really, you need industry. That's why you need better collaboration between industry and government to kind of get that right. Otherwise, you're measuring the wrong things. People think you should be caring about X when you really should be caring about Y, and everybody's kind of flying blind. It just adds a lot of cost and uncertainty, even more cost and uncertainty in the system. So I just don't know what it takes to do. Like not every industry, not every industry or sector is like wants to do that. So there's also the incentive to get people to get on the same page, which isn't always there. So.
And a materiality standard is so squishy from the legal definition. It's so squishy, right? And we often say like things aren't material until they're material, right? So do you know what like the things that you didn't think were going to be material?
Yeah, almost by definition. Yeah.
Yeah. And now in like an interconnected world where weird things happen on TikTok and suddenly, Target stock have a problem. Like it's not sort of the linear logic that we are sort of used to using. And so thinking about it sort of across sector, but horizontally, but then also vertically as well. It's a challenge.
I would say, I think there's a another kind of collaboration point, which is really important, which is collaboration between people who are in the sustainability function and the business, the operating business, which I think it's something that I think has been allowed to sustainability has been allowed to be a bit of a silo over the last couple of years. I think because it's been something that there's been so much enthusiasm around. And also, I think when it comes to regulation, it's kind of been like, oh, well, that's the thing the sustainability team should be tackling. But in order to get this right, it has to be a real collaboration and deep integration between the people who are thinking about sustainability first and the people who are thinking about the business first. And it's at the intersection of those things that you actually get the answers about what's material and have a sustainability program that's truly durable.
Yeah, so
On
more
that point, as
CFO's office rather than sitting by itself, basically. You know what I mean? Or wherever corporate strategy sits.
But I think, I mean, using the materiality standard, if your sustainability team is being put to its highest and best use, if it doesn't sit under finance, who are the people that decide materiality? Your general counsel and your CFO, who has to sign off on all the material risks that go into the financial filings. That's where your sustainability people should sit, right? They shouldn't sit in a silo. They should either sit with a business unit or in the corporate function that is determining those specific issues. And it's a very narrow set of people to report to. But it does signal how quality, right? I mean, it would always be a red flag to me as an equity analyst if the sustainability team sat in policy and government affairs. It's like, okay, so this is a marketing exercise, So I think, reintegrating sustainability into the business appropriately, I think is really important. And I also just like my wish for the world in 2025 is for companies that are sort of startups and venture capital investor focused to have them build sustainability in instead of growing and only focusing on revenue and then having to retrofit the thing. Let's like stop retrofitting companies because then sustainability becomes a cost center. Whereas if you just build in the processes from the beginning and it becomes everybody's responsibility, it doesn't become oh, I guess we have to pay for this in retrospect now that there's a problem.
I'd like to spend, since it came up a couple times, just a minute or two on AI. And Josh, I'd love to hear your thoughts on AI, both as a trend in personally, professionally, sustainability wise. How are you thinking about AI and its impacts on the market?
I think that if you put AI to the side specifically for a second and just think about technology and what it should be doing. It should be taking the things that are hard, that are complicated, that are costly, and shrinking them down, making them manageable, making them more efficient, making it doable. And I think that work of applying technology to different business problems, right? That's like the history of business. I think we think about it at Novata in the context of, all right, now how do we think about applying technology to sustainability problems so that this thing that is big and complicated and confusing, we can simplify and make it much more efficient. And AI to me feels like kind of the logical extension of that. It's another technology tool in the toolkit to allow us to make some of the things that are painful and annoying, like regulatory filings, like the process of mapping different data points to each other. There are new tools in our tool belt that we can use to make these activities a lot less painful, which I think is great. But I will tell you, I mean, we have conversations about AI internally, and of course, because we've got a lot of people who think really hard about sustainability, people have flagged that the energy consumption associated with AI usage, right, it's extraordinary, and so we have to be doubly thoughtful at Novata about it because we want to use this new tool, but we don't want to use it just to use it. We want to use it in ways that actually are solving problems that it is uniquely able to solve. And I think that's my encouragement to folks around AI. And by the way, not dissimilar from sustainability, right? It's not about spraying sustainability, fairy dust over everything and calling it a day. you don't wave the wand of AI over everything and call it a day. The goal here is to really be targeted in how you use it for purposes that it's uniquely well suited to serve.
Thanks. Well, we are almost at time, so I'd like to end with one question for all of you. And I would like to say thank you to everyone who's been on the call. We'll be sending out a recording for reference, and if we can support your company in any way with your sustainability initiatives this year, we encourage you to reach out. We will have a poll at the end to see if there's opportunities that we can support you, as well as we will work to reference the BCG study that Allison mentioned. I know there's been some audience interest in reading that as well. But my last question for all of you is, and really relevant to perhaps the audience that we have on this call, it does seem like there is definitely some nervousness in the market among sustainability professionals that investment in their initiatives may decline or go away or be paused during this particular moment in time. So how would you encourage investors and portfolio companies to think about sustainability investments in 2025? Mona, shall we start with you?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I feel really strongly about this. So I think it's just like a huge mistake for investors, GPs, and portfolio companies to shift course on a long-term sustainability strategy because of short-term headwinds and volatility. I mean, if you believe in resilience, which we all do, everybody on here, I'm assuming agrees, it requires you to be data-driven, focused on the material risks that we've been talking about, really laser focused on what is going to drive value into your enterprises. And if you've done that well, it allows you to have this foundation for understanding your business. And then obviously we've been talking about this entire call, so you got to look on the horizon of what's coming next. And yes, you have to adjust course. So the way I guess I think about it is a little bit like a sailboat, right? So you know you're trying to go to a particular direction. You get in your sailboat, of course there are headwinds and tailwinds. Sometimes you have the tailwinds, sometimes you have the headwinds, sometimes you do have to adjust course a little bit. But if you've done this right, I think Allison said this earlier, this should be foundational to what your enterprises are doing. And if you stop doing it, what you're doing is embedding material risk back into injecting it back into your business.
Exactly.
So I don't know who really wants to do that in this environment. I mean, that's like a crazy idea. So it's convenient. It feels easy. It's a short term. You're going to pay. It's like a long-term cost to the enterprises. And so, yeah, if you didn't believe it, if you didn't have conviction on the way in, then maybe you shouldn't have been doing it or you weren't doing it right. But every single enterprise globally really has to think about this, and it has to be part of the business process. And if you do that well, you know, it's like onward, right? So this too shall pass. That's me.
I completely agree, and I'll just keep this short, which is I keep saying, who wants to invest in unsustainable businesses? Who wants to invest in unsustainable businesses? If somebody says that they want to invest in unsustainable businesses, you need to cut off the conversation and go get a cocktail. So it should be like, it should be foundational to what you do, not a marketing exercise, not something you dressed up, not something you did so you could charge extra fund fees. It should be something that was intentional and that was meant to create resilience within the business or the portfolio or whatever it was you were doing.
Well, Josh, I'm not sure how you're going to respond with any more passion than those two answers, but I am going to give you the last word on this.
I heard a line a couple of weeks ago from somebody who's doing work in this space who the line that they had heard and passed along to me was somebody who said, look, I wasn't doing this work for President Biden. I'm not going to stop doing this work because of President Trump. And I think if you're in the business of building a resilient organization, right, there's a business case there that I think we've talked about over the last 45 minutes that that remains unchanged. So let's do the work.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mona, Allison, and Josh. Thank you to our audience. And if we can help you or your companies be resilient, sustainable, successful in 2025, we are certainly here to support you in that. So please let us know how we can support you, and we're happy to connect. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.